It is truly great to be back in beautiful Luxembourg, a place the Parliament knows well, where we have a significant part of our staff and of our hearts. A country that proves time and again that the limitations of geography are no limit to the potential of a people. This is a place that has shown the world what is possible with strategic vision, and your achievements, as we've also just heard, are proof of that. Thank you for inviting me to address you. I should have come last year, actually, so I wouldn't say this is a last-minute invitation. So I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for me and for the European Parliament to have these discussions with all of you, with European industry, especially now, when it is so essential that we get things right. I'm not blind to the challenges that you face. Too often we see legislation created in vacuums, or worse, as a knee-jerk reaction to the latest headlines that anyone on the ground will tell you is either unimplementable, unrealistic, or comes with consequences like job losses, shrinking margins and missed opportunities. Our well-meaning regulations and reporting obligations keep piling up, creating layers of bureaucracy that weigh down businesses of all sizes. And as the fragmentation within our single market persists, it stifles growth and innovation, ultimately playing right into the hands of our global competitors. Now, I do not want to paint a bleak picture. I'm by nature an optimist, but I think a degree of self-critical analysis, of listening and changing course when needed is important. Because that is precisely what we can prove, that in spite of all our many achievements, our continent is still one on the rise. Europe, like Luxembourg, has the talent, the capital, and the drive. And we are still the natural home of the inventors, of the builders, of the risk-takers. We just need the right long-term frameworks to bring that spirit home and create real, sustainable growth and prosperity that benefits all. That is why, as a European Parliament, and myself as its president, I want this new legislature, which is a different legislature to the previous one. It is a very different parliament to the previous one. But it is one where we can find majorities to have a mandate where competitiveness and security are the twin drivers of our work, with a return to strong economic growth supported by a new security infrastructure and architecture, where we are able to really focus on implementation. Maybe regulatory holiday is a little bit too much, but I get the point, although I'm a legislator, so. But where we find ourselves sometimes in situations where we propose new rules before we have even fully assessed the current ones, where we are able ultimately to work towards making things that are just a little bit easier for families, for farmers, for industry. And that means focusing on predictability, on stability, and innovation. First of all, on predictability. I want the European Union to be known for its effective and efficient regulation, based on ultimately common sense, rather than the red tape we still see too much of. Now, this does not mean doing away with the values that are at the core of everything we do, because we are proud, and rightly so, of our European way. But in too many cases, we see a duplication, sometimes even a triplication of obligations. And this directly impedes on companies operating internationally. And this cannot and will not be conducive to a competitive economy in the long term. And that is why the coming 5 years need to be about better, smarter, coherent regulation focused on simplification and implementation. And as co-legislator, the European Parliament can help here with a predictable regulatory framework and on new ways forward in the competitiveness compass, the simplification omnibus, and the clean industrial deal, which will be rolled out in the coming weeks. Now, we will all have to work together, and I know I can continue to count on Luxembourg with Prime Minister Luc Frieden in the European Council, your ministers, Luc, many of which we are very happy to see here today in the Council, and Christoph Hansen in the Commission in helping us together with your members of the European Parliament to achieve that. Predictability also means bringing an end to fragmentation and fully integrating the banking, capital markets, energy and telecoms markets across Europe. And this is how we level the playing field. There will be pushback, there has always been on this, but if not now, when? How we reduce costs for companies and consumers? How can we give businesses the clarity that they need to plan, to invest, to grow and anchor themselves in Europe? The bottom line is that companies, and this, if I can take one thought or experience that we had throughout the European Parliament election campaign, where not only was I campaigning in my own country, but in all other countries. And there was one thing that was repeated time and time again in every single country that I visited in. The bottom line is that companies need to have the space to focus less on navigating a maze of differing regulations or meeting administrative requirements and more on implementing their ideas in a business environment that might see you fail, but that also help you get back up again. We don't have enough of that in Europe. Mario Draghi and Enrico Letta gave us some important insights to this effect, but what we need now is ultimately the political will to move forward. After predictability comes stability. With geopolitical divides that are growing, the false hope of isolationism that is becoming more attractive, supply chains that are facing increasing instability, and the way global economic powers perceive their industries relative to ours shifting, Europe's place on the world stage is facing extraordinary pressure, and we absolutely cannot allow ourselves to be squeezed. In 4 days' time, Donald Trump will be inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States of America. And we should not be surprised that his administration will stand up for American interests. Frankly, we were elected by Europeans and we will stand up for European interests. But I believe that the best way forward for both of us is not to start a protectionist race to the bottom. And this, as Chairman Russell has just said, is the opposite of what Luxembourg stands for, what open markets and fair trade depend on. I use two examples. Tesla is the most popular electrical vehicle brand in Europe. Outside North America, we are the #1 consumer of Apple products. The United States cannot afford to lose our market. We depend on each other, and that is why I am convinced that we can create a win-win for us all. Trade wars with higher tariffs and counter-tariffs benefit nobody. But that does not mean that we should not be prepared and ready for any eventuality. And in that way, my hope is that the United States will see that America first cannot happen if it becomes America only. We also need to get real about the challenges that we face with energy. One of the first things that we learned when Russia waged its illegal war against Ukraine is that energy was, is, and will always be political. Now, I am proud of how we increased interconnections between member states, how we stepped up our storage capacities, and how we reduced at least our reliance on single suppliers. But as it stands, EU companies still face electricity costs up to 3 times higher than in other regions. This drives up production costs, it lowers margins, and it damages competitiveness. And it is ultimately a barrier to growth that we must address. And I think that the scale of the challenge is one that merits a more implementable plan, ultimately one that is devoid, if you will, of emotional headlines. Yes, we have a responsibility to decarbonize, to lead on global efforts. But at the same time, we need to be very aware of our economic realities. Moving too far, too fast, can be counterproductive to our very own climate goals, and the impact on competitiveness can be huge. This is part of how we assert our autonomy as Europeans. Finally, we need to tap into Europe's inherent spirit of innovation. The reality is that Europe is an aging continent. Even as we heavily invest in upskilling and reskilling, and we are, still about 1 million people will leave the job market every year until 2050. And this shrinking labour market means fewer hands every year to drive our industries, and Luxembourg knows this all too well. Productivity then is not just an option. The key to closing this gap lies in innovation and accelerating our digital transition and ramping up investments in strategic sectors like pharma, transport, semiconductors, clean and cutting-edge technology, areas where we all, especially, look to Luxembourg for leadership. And this is how we can make lost ground. AI can also be a game-changing, and it is unsurprising to me that Luxembourg stands among Europe's leaders with the highest share of enterprises using it. It is yet another example of your resilience, of your reinvention and ability to rise to global challenges. Of course, this does not mean that we should not remain cautious about its risks, but it is exactly why the European Union led with the world's first comprehensive Artificial Intelligence Act. We still need to implement it, though I saw a new draft law was proposed in Luxembourg to do just that. But I think it provides a solid framework that could fuel innovation without strangling entrepreneurs. Ladies and gentlemen, Luxembourg's vision, its leadership, its commitment to innovation, it is a model for what is possible when we embrace the future with open arms. And in the European Parliament, I want to assure you all that we are everything but afraid of change. And as we look ahead, this conversation, as we would have today between policymakers and industry, will only grow more crucial, more important. We will need to keep working together, pushing each other, challenging each other, and supporting each other wherever we can. That is how we will grow our economy and how we will make sure that it serves every single person relying on it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberta Metsola, the President of the European Parliament.